Hey, Mike. All right, we've got
Folks.
you, and there we've got Brett back.
There we go.
Awesome. Good job, guys. Sorry to everybody that's tuned in. Some just a few little glitches here, and Brett, we're actually coming down to the end here. We got a couple minutes, and then I've got Dean Millard coming on at 10:30.
We
So
got the real radio guy coming on.
the real deal, Dean Millard. Yeah, he'd love that. Yeah, he's probably got a better budget than I do, I'm sure.
I don't know. I saw your stream. I watched your other one from the other day. You look like you got a pretty good setup there.
Yeah, it's a decent setup, but it's certainly I mean, it comes with its challenges sometimes, right? It's a and
Tough to do it live. I bet
yeah, it
that's
is.
probably the.
And the other thing, some guys have. I'm not complaining, but some guys have producers and other things that they can watch and do. And anyway, you know what? It is what it is. And sometimes I have a few glitches. I had Rob Clark on yesterday or Tuesday, and right in the middle of it, Mike hung up on him. Actually, it wasn't Mike's fault. It was my fault, but Mike's there, so he's got to put up with it.
It's too bad I wasn't there because you totally could just blame me then.
Did you? By the way, so Rob Clark was on, and he sang the anthem. Honestly, one of the greatest moments in on the podcast. It felt like I honestly like. First off, like that takes a lot of guts, say, to get and just sing like whatever. Like I'm not. You will never, and everybody be thankful for that. But you'll never hear me just belt out a song uh, on here, right?
Same here.
Yeah, but Rob just gets out there and he sings and does his thing, and that's great. So I just talked through your final 3 minutes there, Brett. Any kind of last words for those of us there? Be kind to your local ref or anything like that.
Yeah, just I don't know what to tell you, man. Just try to remember that it's. I don't think. Well, I can only speak for myself, but I'm not out there to try to screw over one team or the other. And I do know there are two teams out there. I do know.
Yeah.
I can count. You got to be more creative than that. That one doesn't. I don't like that. That one just pisses me off. You got to get creative on your beaks and your chirps. Make me smile. You're not gonna take a penalty if you make me smile and laugh.
What was the one that was on Twitter the other day that I was going to remember? Like how many teams did you get cut from before you became a ref?
Yeah,
enjoyed
no, I
that one.
haven't played hockey since like probably Pee Wee. I switched to reffing, and I don't know. I didn't feel just never felt like I needed to play.
Yeah. Do you now just curious, and then I think Dean's waiting here, so I'm not going to keep him waiting
Okay.
much longer. But did most refs play hockey as well, or?
I don't know. I mean, it's probably. I'm sure there's lots that do. I know there's guys that play in our league and ref in it.
Yeah.
And some guys can do it, and some guys can't. Because like you can't be playing as a player one night and like going crazy and giving it to refs, and then the next night you got to work with the same guy as a ref. So some guys can do it, and some guys they can't. Some guys have to choose. I'm going to ref in a different league, or I'm going to play in a different league.
Yeah. Well, I get that. All right. Well, I better get to Dean. Thanks so much, Brett. We'll have you again on next Thursday. You on? Yep, for that.
Hey, man, as long as I don't have beer league to ref, I'm going to be at home every night.
All right. Tune in next Thursday.
I'm not going out anywhere these days, so.
All right. Thanks so much, Brett.
Okay.
Yeah.
See you later.
Good night, Brett.
Yeah.
And we're going to add in Mr. Dean Millard here. Hopefully we... Dean, let me know when you're on. There you are. Hey, Dean.
How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Matt, you might be the first guest that has a better setup than I do. I'm not sure how I feel about that. Yeah. Welcome. Welcome to the show.
My wife would call it an obsession.
Yeah.
as I started collecting jerseys. And I would go when I worked at Global Television, I would go to like a collectibles event to do interviews and get stories and come back with boxes of masks. And she's like, that's not your job. Your job is to interview, not to buy. So, but it all has served a purpose now because I have a decent setup.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's nice. And you got the Shure microphone, which is the dream of microphones. And
Yeah.
yeah, I've tuned into your pods once or twice, and it's great listening to you, and great having you here, man.
Perfect. I
Yeah.
appreciate being able to do something right now other than my wife and I are practicing social distancing. She's in our bedroom and I'm in here. So that's how we're making sure that we're safe from it. So it's good to talk to somebody else.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. Do you know Mike Dirsa, who's on here right now?
I
Oh, we're losing you a little bit.
believe I do. How are you, Mike? Somebody else.
I'm doing well, Dean.
Excellent. There we go.
Yeah, good. So, Dean, the prime purpose for us doing these live streams Tuesdays and Thursdays is just to kind of lighten things up a little bit, have a little bit of fun. There's lots of reasons to be down right now. Man, I think, I don't know how much time you spend on Twitter. I probably spend way more than I should. But it can be a toxic place, can it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny, right? Like, the good people all say how toxic it is, but we still we still go back for our daily beats anyway, right?
Yeah, and I believe that too. It is a place that can just be downright awful when people can hide behind not having to provide their identity or anything like that. But the one or two or three really cool videos, and there's a few different people out there. Rex Chapman always seems to brighten my day a little bit with the different things that he tweets out there. So even though it does suck a lot of the time, when you see some of those things and just videos that are just like, okay, that makes me give me a little bit more faith in humanity, especially right now where there's so many people doing idiotic things when it's very simple to just relax, stay at home. We don't need to be on a beach in spring break right now. Like there are bigger things that are more important than being on a beach in spring break right now. So it's just the things those are the things that get me angry on Twitter when I see that. I'm like, why can't you just stay at home and relax? It's really not that hard to do for a little while. It's a sacrifice for the greater good, but there are things that do make me smile. So it does, I think, make it worth it. Having said that, if I ever won the lottery or became independently wealthy, I do not think I would be on social media.
I love that. So that's the trigger point, is it? Just having lots of money.
It's kind of it's like a necessary evil to this
right.
to this business that we try to do. When you're trying to promote something, you have to do it on social media these days.
Yeah, no, that's so true. Tell us a little bit about Podcast Alley, and then I'd like to talk some hockey if you don't mind. But
yeah, you betcha. Yeah. This star necessity. Bell made their cutbacks nationwide in just over a year ago now, and then I was, well, what am I going to do? And I couldn't do anything for till late May. I had my lawyer look at it, and he's like, you can't even travel to Russia and do a podcast. That's how wide ranging your whatever the contract that I had, the clause in the contract, the non-compete. So I had to wait, and the whole time I was like, what am I going to do next? I've been in broadcasting my whole life. This has to be a logical step. A lot of people had encouraged me on social media to try to get into do podcasting. So I decided to start it. And obviously I wanted to do a sports and pop culture, which is kind of what my show was like on TSN 1260 when I was on there. I love baseball, so working with the Edmonton Prospects was a natural fit. So Prospects Baseball Show is one. And I'm also a big fan of cannabis, and I want people to, now that it is legal, to be able to be smart about it and know what they're doing. So the Cannabis 101 podcast is one part entertainment, one part education, and we try to help people on a journey through legalization of cannabis. So that's what I'm doing right now, and I've got a few other projects in the works. One with Craig Button that I'm not sure what we're going to do with it. It's a draft podcast, and I don't know when we're going to launch that now with all of this going on, but a few other things. And is podcastalley, where you can find it all. And I find podcasts a lot more fun than I loved radio, but there's just so much more freedom.
Yeah, no, and I've never been in radio, which is painfully obvious some days. But I think for those of us that are around, we love the content. I know when I was having you on, there were a couple of people that reached out to me and thought that was pretty cool. Mike, you're sitting over there as you're my play-by-play guy today. Any thoughts?
I got to tell Mr. Millard there that I used to really enjoy the evenings with you on 1260, and it was kind of sad to see you go, but it's good to see you back behind the mic. And maybe you're spending more time behind the mic now doing all these various podcasts than you were before.
Well, it's funny. When I started doing this podcast, then I realized, I don't have Hernan Salas to book guests for me and run the board and promote. And I don't have a promotions department like we had at the station and all this. You are a one-man show. So when I started doing podcasts, the recording, hitting the record button and doing the podcast and the interview, that was the easiest part about it, the editing. And listen, I had a camera guy named Hamish Wright at Global Television. He used to call reporters hair and teeth. He said, all is hair and teeth. That's why you're on the camera. And he goes, without us, you're radio. And I didn't realize how much I relied on so many other people in the broadcasting industry until you're doing every job yourself. I was not a tech guy. So the learning curve on the equipment and, this, I went through several mics before I got this and my mixing board, my soundboard, and how to set it up. Man, I have so much respect for people that are smart when it comes to technology, because I am not. And there was a lot of frustrated nights in here. But podcasting is fun. Now that I've kind of got the handle on it, it's a lot of work, but it is a lot of fun because it is it's so creative. So, and it's still a way to connect to the people that enjoyed my my work for. So it's fun to be on the air, and it's good to be doing live. I like what you guys are doing right now with the live stuff. I think we could all use a whole lot of distractions from the scary things that's going on right now, and
right.
The frustration and the sadness that we're not being able to see the best part of the season right now. So kudos on you guys for giving everybody something to think about that isn't COVID-19 or cancellation and things like that.
Well,
Yeah.
And to be fair, I can't watch another video game of hockey ever. Like this is to me is maybe the worst trend I've ever seen. But I don't. Is it catching on? Like, are you guys? I mean, maybe you guys are into it. I tried to tune in on I think it was New Jersey and Calgary or something today at one point, and the only joy I got out of it was the first 5 seconds I tuned in. New Jersey scored on Calgary, and I thought, well, that's not bad. That's good. But then I realized I'm watching a video game. So are either of you two into that? Like this, it doesn't do anything for me. Oh, I'm losing you.
I'm with you, Mike.
There you are. You're back. My connection must be down slow. I think with all the people out there, plugged in online everywhere. It's I've noticed that bandwidth has been in short supply some days.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of companies that particularly the streaming companies, Netflix and Shaw and TELUS, have increased trying to now without increasing the cost for a lot of people. But I'm not into the video game watching. I play video games, and I will. I shouldn't say I'm not into it. I will put on like Major League Baseball and put a Dodgers game on right now when there is no baseball, because I can watch baseball and the video game looks so realistic. But I'm not really into that, and I'll do that very few times. I don't want to sound like I'm doing that every night, but I'm not into watching video games. I'd rather watch old games. I've got a bunch of old DVDs that I've been watching. I watched last night. I watched the Canada Cup '84 Canada Soviet Union game where the Oilers and the Islanders had just played in the Stanley Cup final, and then now they're trying to be teammates, and there was a lot of friction between that. I remember Brent Sutter telling me about the friction in the dressing room between the Oiler faction and the Islander faction, and that was a great tournament. And Mike Bossy scored the game winner. Which, imagine this, guys. Mike Bossy had played in 5 straight Stanley Cup finals and 2 Canada Cups. You know how much hockey that is? That's like over 100 games of extra hockey. And he just didn't want to say no because he didn't want a bad reputation of saying no to the country. And he said that Canada Cup, he didn't enjoy it because he was so gassed. But those are the games that I'm watching. I'm watching old classic games. I watched the Oilers and Flyers 85 Cup clinch. Oilers just blew the Flyers out of the water.
Yeah.
And I don't know how long I'm going to last watching those games because I'm going to run out eventually. I don't have that many, but that's what I'm going with right now is actual old classic games and different kind of streaming. I started watching Narcos tonight, so I'm really starting to get into that. So that's what I'm going with. I'm not really into the video games.
So I watched last night on Sportsnet. They aired the '86 game. It was Lemieux. It was when Gretzky broke the assist record.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, while Gretzky was fantastic, like he always was in those days, and Mike, you even commented about it on Twitter, watching Paul Coffey race by those guys, he was the McDavid of the time, right? Like his speed was just unbelievable, right? And the other thing that I love about watching those is you can tell right away in the quality of stick versus today's game, right? Like just how the puck hits the stick, how the puck comes off the stick, the lack of flex, like it's unreal, and you don't really, I rarely watched a classic game while we were watching hockey. I did the last lockout, and and I didn't even watch a lot then because I went out and played hockey instead. And now I can't go out and play hockey. I can't do some of the things I would have done otherwise. And so, I'm left watching these classic games, and to be fair, I've actually really enjoyed it. I watched the OV and against Crosby playoff game last night. What a fantastic game, right? Like, and what's great is they're far enough back that I don't remember anything. It's like watching them over again, right? Like it's watching them live and watching the old ITV and you didn't get Tim Spellis on there or anything, but it was still good. It was kind of a cool broadcast, right?
Yeah, I think that's the neat thing that I notice about those broadcasts in particular is there's no rink board advertising. There's no score ticker. There's no ticker about the news. There's nothing to distract you from the game. You're just watching and focused on the game. And I'm not saying today's broadcasts are bad, but I'm saying there's a lot going on in today's broadcasts that you can focus on and take your eyes off what is happening on the ice. And that, that's the first thing I notice. And the other thing is just, it's so fun to watch some of these games. Like I watched the 88 game 2 Gretzky over the shoulder of Vernon, my favorite Gretzky goal of all time, shorthanded in overtime. I watched that game the other day, and it was just neat to see how physical and skilled the Flames and Oilers were. And even the 87 Oilers Flyers game that I watched, it was so good. But you mentioned Paul Coffey, and I'm glad you brought that up because that 84 Canada Cup, he makes one of the best defensive plays. For anybody that said Paul Coffey could never play defense, his anticipation, a Russian or Rush Soviet 2-on-1, he anticipates, jumps up, breaks up the 2-on-1, and goes the other way, and they end up scoring. And you're right. He would just glide on the ice. I mean, some of those guys, Chris Pronger came here and people thought he was lazy, but no, it was like his strides were like 1 to everybody else's 4. Where Paul Coffey, his strides were so powerful, you didn't even notice. You just noticed he was from blue line to blue line, and you're like, how did he get there so fast? So he's one guy that I've always loved watching. I call him the Fonz. Like I think he could shoot a puck at a jukebox and turn it on or something like that. He seems like he was the coolest Oiler out of those '80s Oilers. He was always like the cool, relaxed dude.
Yeah, you know, you're right. And my one memory of him, because I actually was, out of all the Oilers back then, Paul Coffey was definitely my favorite. But I remember when he scored 47, and he was on the front page of the Sun with the puck. And you know, I think, you know, it was that year. It was '86, right? I think that happened, and I actually delivered the paper back then. And I held on to that cover. It seems forever. I don't know where it is now, but it's too bad because you know, I remember that. I mean, and how amazing would that be today for, you know, a defenseman to score that many goals? Like it, you know, be unheard of. I mean, who's close right now? Like what Makar was maybe at. What was he at before we went to break? Either way,
John Carlson was on a pretty good roll, but you're right. I mean, Paul Coffey scoring 48 goals, and he scored 40 twice. You could call 30-goal scorer because he did it 4 times. Like that's a 30-goal scorer. When have you ever been able to call a defenseman a 30-goal scorer? You're absolutely right. He was like, and you know what? He probably got overshadowed so much by Wayne Gretzky, as everybody did, because they played on the same team. But if Paul Coffey would have been playing in Toronto or Chicago or, you know, you go back and look Philadelphia or something like that, it would have been such a bigger story. He probably got overshadowed by Gretzky. But when have you ever been able to call a 30-goal scoring defenseman? I don't remember that. Maybe Bobby Orr, when he played, would have had the same impact.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and that's maybe the only guy, right? Like, you know, it was so much fun to watch last night, and I put out another tweet, right? Like when I'm looking at that team last night, and after I did that, and everybody else sort of put in their 2 cents, like you start to realize just. Like, I mean, we know how lucky we had it, but sometimes you got to look back and you know, you had that was Tikkanen's rookie year in '86. He's shadowing Mario Lemieux that whole game, and guys don't do it like this anymore. But he's like staring at Lemieux, right? Like around the ice, if you watch him, he doesn't even like. There's nobody does it like that, right? Like not anymore, anyway. And he could have gave a shit about the puck. All he did was stare at Lemieux the whole game, and I mean Lemieux was good enough that he'd still get 2 points. But you know, having said that, I mean that, you know, you had Tikkanen, who was one of the best at that. You had McSorley and Dave Semenko. Like you want to have some real muscle on your team. Could you ask for 2 bigger guys? Like I'm pretty sure they had to widen the penalty box to get those guys in. Like they were unbelievable. And those, you know what? None of those 3 are really what, you know, like they weren't top 6 guys on that team, right? Like, you know, you had Messier, Anderson, Curry, Gretzky, and the list goes on. And then somebody said Mark Napier, and I'm like, oh, shit, I forgot about Napier, right? And then you know, and then everybody said, well, this was my favorite year. It really didn't matter what year. That team and was rightfully a dynasty. I just, you know, I still look back and think how lucky we were. And then to look back and watch Gretzky and some of the moves he was making on the ice with that wooden stick, you can't tell me he still wouldn't get 250 points in this league. He was phenomenal. Like he was unbelievable.
Yeah, it was amazing. You know, I grew up in Manitoba, but I was an Oilers fan because of Andy Moog. Oddly enough, I didn't see Andy Moog play live until he was with Dallas, because every time I would go to Winnipeg, Fuhr would play or Lemlin or whatever. But I remember we would watch these games when I would get to watch the Oilers. and even the games that we would go watch live, and you just would watch Gretzky and you'd be entertained for the entire game. And the playmaking ability between him and Jari Kurri. And I don't know, like Esa Tikkanen and anybody that rode shotgun on that Gretzky line. Like Semenko scored 20 goals one year. Whether it was Mike Krushelnyski, who came over. And I remember Gene Principe told a funny, hilarious story on my podcast that there was the old gentleman's club across from Northlands, the Forum, and he was in there, and Gene went up to Wayne Gretzky, who was in there, and he said they both had their back to the stage, by the way. But anyway, he went up to Gretzky and he said, "Hey, what do you know about this Krushelnyski guy?" And he says, "Well, yeah, he's pretty good." He goes, "Do you think I should take him?" He goes, "Well, yeah, he's going to play on my line." So Gene went into his hockey pool with this secret knowledge that nobody else knew, because there was no social media back then. Waited a while to take Krushelnyski, who had 80-something points, 86 points or something, and won his hockey pool. I mean, whoever they put on that line with Gretzky did so well. Does that sound familiar to anybody you guys know currently wearing an Oiler uniform? I mean, Esa Tikkanen could be the Zach Kassian. I mean, whoever McDavid plays with, and then when Draisaitl or Neil, whoever, the third guy is so interchangeable. So the Oilers went, Tikkanen at times, Semenko at times, Napier, Krushelnyski, all these different guys. They went in pairs, and then Messier and Anderson were the other pair, and then Dave Lumley and the Hunters and whatever else. But it was that situation. So there's some familiarity with the greatest player in the game now compared to the greatest player back then. Is that whoever played with those guys, virtually all of them had success, and it's pretty similar when you look at it with this year's team and this current version of the Edmonton Oilers, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. And yeah, I mean, the only thing I guess is, there's we haven't really fully established any pairs yet, right? Like we need to when we get to that level. I mean, this squad, if assuming that we can get through what we're going through right now, could be one of those teams that you just expect to be there year after year, at least for 3 or 4 years, right? And this year has been an eye opener, I think, for a lot of people, and just how skilled Draisaitl is. Of course, those of us in Edmonton already knew, but for those outside of Edmonton, in fact, I think on TSN they gave Draisaitl the nod over McDavid as the MVP of the Oilers. They did the MVP for the Canadian cities. So, one of the things we were going to talk about was, the playoff scenario if the league should come back. Now, I always kind of had a busy day today, but I heard, Mike, you said that they were talking a little bit on the radio today about I'm going crazy here. What's
I got you. Yeah, Gary Bettman was saying that they don't want to, do anything. Well, they want to make sure next season goes off as normal. So what that means is if they're going to put together, the rest of the regular season and playoffs this year, it has to be done sort of in a timely fashion so that next year goes on just like a normal year. Personally, I wish they would, worry about this year first and then next year, because I just think there's, teams put in their work. The season's 85% completed. Let's get it in. I think people need that,
Yeah, it's such a slippery slope. I think they're focusing on next year because that's big picture, and then ultimately they're going to have contingency plans for this year. I've heard everything from the 24 teams in the playoff, which I don't know, I'm not crazy about, to the their proposal about the other, where they're going to come back and finish the season, play the playoffs, have like a month of October off season, draft, the free agency, and then start the season up. And I had Jeff Odgers on my podcast this week, and he's like, how are the players going to survive that? Like that is so much hockey, much less than you get into the playoffs the next year. So I think this is logically how it has to work. Is you put in your contingency plan. Okay, plan one is we're going to play the full season, the rest of the season, and get into the playoffs. And so you have a date that, okay, by April 1st, okay, that's scrapped. And then you go to, okay, May 1st, we have to take away the regular season and just go with the 16 teams that are in the playoffs. If we can start it by then. And then you keep going past that, and then you're in July. It's like, okay, we're done. Like, I think if you get to the end of July and you get to August, you have no hope. Even if you get to the end of June, that is like, you got to come back. You have to have a training camp. You have to make sure buildings are available. I mean, so I think you have a timeline of where it's going to be like, okay, we can do this. Okay, now we can't do this, and we do this, blah, blah, blah. Percentage-wise, I'd say it's like 70% they're not going to have a season. I'll give 30%, and that's being really optimistic, I think, 30% that they'll have a season. So it's unfortunate because teams have built up such momentum, and you know, man, we had the terrific Battle of Alberta, and how would it be to see that in the playoffs? Like, we're all excited about that. And then when that's thinking in the short term, that's why the league as a whole is looking big picture, saying, you know, our priority, because what they don't want is to start the season back and then have an outbreak within players or something and have to shut down again.
Yeah.
And here's the other thing. I mean, we think here in Canada, we're doing a pretty good job at this. We're trying to get ahead of the curve and flatten the curve. It's the country to the south of us that's going to determine what happens. Like the idiots that are on the beach at spring break are prolonging this. And unfortunately, we're at the mercy of being attached to the United States. So I would love to say we could do this. If we were just talking about the Memorial Cup, I think the CHL could probably get that in, because you're mostly talking about Canadian teams that we can contain here. When we're talking about the NHL, we have to rely on Americans, and unfortunately, there's a lot of, and I'm sure it's happening in Canada too. I'm not saying every Canadian is staying at home, but we're relying on, unfortunately, the Darwin Award winners right now to try and stem this curve, and that's why I don't think the NHL is going to happen, because I don't think the United States is going to be able to get ahead of us like we are, particularly here in Alberta. Like, we're doing a really good job here in Alberta, but I think that's what we're up against, is dealing and relying on the Americans to get ahead of this, and I'm not sure they will.
Yeah, we're doing a really good job, and the state of New York is doing a terrible job.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? I've never really put that thought process together, but that's exactly it. I mean, we keep thinking about what it's going to be like here in, say, 6 weeks, which is really what's been in my head when I've been thinking about this, whether the season's been salvageable. But yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I'd be surprised if they get this under control in the U.S. It's going to be a Italy type meltdown, I think, just by the looks of it. And it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. I'll tell you that. And so I think maybe the fear is not whether this season even happens. It's what happens to next season, and how does that start, and does it start on time? One of the questions we had talked about prior was, what teams is this going to affect the most? And as I'm thinking this through, there's a couple things that come to mind. One is, of course, the salary cap and where that goes. That's going to affect some teams. Edmonton, with some of the contracts that we've got, and of course Toronto. You got to think is going to have some challenges there. But what about these teams like Arizona that struggle to get fans in anyway, in Florida, and or do you think we're at risk of losing any teams if this goes on too long, or you think that they're insulated enough by the whole of the NHL to carry on?
Yeah, I don't know if we would even notice if they lost fans in Florida. It's so bad down there right now anyway. I don't think about it. This is different than a labor issue, right? People get pissed off when there's labor issues in sports where guys are making a lot of money compared to the average person. Worldwide situation. Nobody caused this because they were greedy. Nobody was holding out for more money. So I think fans will forgive in this situation, and they're going to want something to do. I mean, they're going to want a release. I mean, the celebrations that are going to happen, it's almost going to be like in Independence Day after they defeat the aliens and they're all partying, right? Like there's going to be gigantic parties and welcome back and let's get back to life again once we finally do get ahead of this. So I think people are going to come back. So I wouldn't worry about that as much. But, I do feel for some teams, and particularly, in our neck of the woods, I feel for Draisaitl, who is going to get 50 goals again, most likely. McDavid would have had 100 points he surely would have. He was only 3 away. For him to have that for 4 straight seasons starts building that legacy. So those things are, and the run that the Mikko Koskinen and Mike Smith were on. So team-wise, I feel bad for the Oilers and their fans for everything that they've been through, the rivalry that was starting to build with the Flames that was looking like it was going to carry into the postseason. I'll include the Canucks in that because they could have made a run for the playoffs. And then, you imagine the winner of the Flames and the Oilers gets the Canucks or vice versa, and you get that triangle rivalry going. So, the Carolina Hurricanes, I feel bad for them because it was just so fun watching them in the playoffs last year. They really got into it. And one of the other teams is the Columbus Blue Jackets. I mean, they traded they did not trade everybody last year, and then they lost everything. And then John Tortorella has them in a playoff position again. That is a great story. And John Tortorella, he's a really nice guy. I met him in an airport one time. I was flying to Tampa when he was unemployed. Well, he wasn't unemployed. He was out of coaching, and he was working for TSN. I just went up and started chatting. We chatted for a half an hour. He couldn't have been nicer. So what you see behind the bench is only part of that personality, and I've always rooted for him since. And for him to have the Blue Jackets in that kind of a playoff position, that's an awesome story, and probably get them the Jack Adams if they can get into the playoffs, at least definitely in the top 3. So those are some of the teams and players and guys that I kind of feel for if we can't get back to finishing the season.
Yeah. No, and there were a lot of great stories kind of working their way through the season, and we finally had some offense back, right? Like it was kind of nice to, it's nice to see more than 2 guys just hit the 50 goal mark, right? And you had Pasternak and Ovi back in there. That Ovi story, I mean, that in itself, right? Like, is this? These few games that we're missing, I mean, that's maybe the chance to break a record that, nobody ever thought would be broken, right? And he's probably the only guy that could get there. I mean, it's still a little bit of a stretch, but I think he needs every game that he has. Not to mention, I always think about these guys, like Jágr was one. Like, they can't, when you're at that level, but you're getting up in years as far as a hockey pro goes, part of the challenge is you got to stay at that level, because once you let yourself go, it's really hard to get back. And so I wonder how much this type of a break will affect, an Ovechkin and any of these players that, this is, we didn't talk about this, but, are there any players we're not going to see next season?
I know Pierre LeBrun said Joe Thornton had texted him saying he was planning on coming back, and Joe Thornton is one of those guys that this might benefit. Like, remember Teemu Selanne coming out of the 2004 lockout? He had bad knees, he had surgery, he had time to recover. I remember talking to Craig Simpson on a desk at Global Television when he came for an interview. Off the desk, I said, you guys should go after Selanne on your ice. He's rested. And they were like, we're going to go after Paul Kariya. They were really focused on getting Paul Kariya after that lockout. And, what Teemu Selanne came back and prolonged his career and won cups. And so there might be guys like Joe Thornton that it might benefit, provided he returns. But, is Patrick Marleau going to come back? He was just in a great situation getting traded to Pittsburgh, where he had a great run. So maybe there's one guy we don't see come back again. But it's unfortunate for guys that are going to end their career really not on their terms. Like most of the, Jason Chimera said he still wanted to play when they told him he could no longer play, or, he wasn't going to get he tried to come back to Edmonton. This is different. This is not even having a chance to realize maybe that you're coming to an end and make plans for your final game. For some guys, their final game might have happened without them even knowing it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the wind gets knocked out of them. Like, I wonder if Zdeno Chara will be back next year too.
I think he's going to play till he's 50.
Yeah, actually, I would not be surprised in the least. One of the things, we could be thankful for is that some of McDavid's best games have been on the comeback game. And so his first game back, whatever it's league play, playoff play, or whatever, you could expect him to light it up. And actually, this is maybe a break that actually helps him a little bit. Maybe get a little bit more recovery in and do some of the things he needs to do to be, 110% coming back. And I think, he's. It's hard to say for a guy that's got however many points in his last 10 games, but he just hasn't looked, that 110% that he usually is. He's more playing like 105. And I always think he played with the flu the other night, and I said something along the lines of, I wish that I played as good as McDavid did with the flu. He's fantastic, but we will get to see him come back, and I just feel like he's that guy that like Lemieux when he came back after his big long absence, right? Like that game to those types of players means so very much, right? And it's the big show, and it's everything, and they just have this drive to compete, and it's like it's all pent up, and they come back, and he could break a record in that game, right? Like that's the kind of thing. Like every opener when he scored the hat trick against Calgary the season before last, right? Like he's that guy, right? And so I am excited about that. I know it's a silly thing to be excited about.
But it is. He came back from the injury and scored that ridiculous goal against Columbus, and you remember when Mario Lemieux did come back? Sportsnet had a Lemieux camera. I don't know if you remember that first game. It was against the Leafs. They had one camera that was on Mario Lemieux the whole time. I would like to see a McDavid. I don't know why Sportsnet doesn't have that as an option, or NHL on Rogers doesn't have that as an option. Like, pick one player in every game and just have a camera on them. Okay, it's the Oilers. We have a McDavid camera. I would pay extra just to watch McDavid on his own.
I'd like a GoPro on his skates with a radar gun.
Yeah.
Well, it's like, you know what? You'll get the radar thing now, right? Like they're with all of these extra analytics they're putting in. I just hope, and I don't know if they bring back that Fox puck like they had at the All-Star game, I will riot. Like that's the one thing that Now you guys tell me, because I haven't looked enough into it. They weren't seriously thinking about bringing that in the playoffs. Like I know they were bringing the analytics piece in, but the Fox puck piece that wasn't.
I don't think so.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I hope they don't do the name tags, the name bars on everybody. Don't do that.
Yeah. It's going to start to look a little bit like a video game, right? With all the little extras. But
totally, yeah.
I don't mind having the analytics.
Like I said, there's enough going on.
Yeah, there is enough going on, and you're right. There was some purity to the old telecasts, and just watching them though, it's great, and see the quality of the video, and to think, we sat there and we sat around that. Those old tubes and watched that hockey and did it religiously. We had to watch it live, right? Because we had no PVR and so
last week, Mike, they showed the Kings and Oilers when Gretzky broke Gordy's record, and I was at that game with my dad, and I remember thinking to myself, "Wow, this is the greatest player in the world, and he's having a really pedestrian game." And then I watched it on the TV last week, and I'm like, what were you smoking?
That's awesome.
I have that game. One of my DVDs. I have that game. I was my poll question the other day on my podcast is what should I watch? It was that Boys on the Bus, Canada Cup '84, and last game at Yankee Stadium. And that one, that's a game I want to watch because that was such a cool moment that it all happened with so much synergy between the Oilers and the Kings, and it's really neat when those kind of moments happen.
So, one of the things I'd asked you as well, wanted to ask you about was what's the I assume over the years you've gone to your fair share of games. What was your best game experience that you've ever been to?
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day. And like I've had the chance to watch. I was covering the Rebels first when they won the Memorial Cup. That was a neat moment because it was a team I had covered all season and really got to know the players and the coaching staff. So that was fun. I watched Taylor Hall dismantle the Wheat Kings in the final, and Brandon is my hometown team, so that was really hard. To sit there in the press box and watch them pump 9 or 10 goals in and just totally deflate the building. And then I've watched a bunch of World Juniors. John Carlson breaking Canada's heart in Saskatoon, and that McDavid and team that McDavid and Nurse were on 2015 in Toronto, where Puljujarvi was also there. But the coolest moment ever was 2006 Game 3 Oilers Sharks. The Sharks had won the first 2 games. They come back to Edmonton. Ryan Smith has his teeth knocked out from Chris Pronger clearing the puck out, which I don't ever think Pronger apologized for. Smith goes in for dental repair. The Oilers are back and forth. The game goes to triple overtime. I was working for Global at the time, so I was just waiting, and obviously we weren't going to make the newscast when the game was going into triple overtime, and it was such a fantastic game. Dwayne Rollison made a ridiculous save. I think that was the game that Rafi Torres laid the hit on. I'm not 100% sure if that was the game that he laid the crushing hit that changed the tide. But I remember Smith coming back and setting up Hork for the game-winning goal in triple overtime. It was so amazing. So that's probably the coolest game I've ever had a chance to cover. That season gave me my coolest moment. To being able to shake hands with Bob Cole in the press box at Northlands Coliseum was it was a moment that I will never forget. And I got to take a picture with him during his last game in Edmonton when he was at Rogers. But meeting Bob Cole during the Stanley Cup Finals in the building, that was like a bucket list for 8-year-old Dean Millard.
That's awesome. I think Mike, you got a picture with Bob Cole, didn't you, as well, the last game?
I didn't get a picture with him, but I bumped into him at Rogers, and I was kind of shocked at how little the man is.
Yeah, yeah,
sweet guy.
That's awesome. That's awesome. One of the things that came to mind was you're talking about being, just a little guy and going through some of those exciting games. My dad was a fruit vendor pretty much my whole life. He had a couple of stands in Edmonton that he sold, BC fruit and cherries and that sort of thing. And when I was younger, I would go and work one of the stands by myself, and then I'd take the bus home and end up on the train, inevitably going by the Coliseum. And it was the year they were playing Boston in the finals, and I was going by, and I would go by right at puck drop, right, and so everybody was already rushed into the arena, and the very first game, I'm walking by, like I had to walk there to get to the LRT, and this guy says to me, which I was just a little kid, but he says, "Hey, I've got a ticket. I'll sell to you for half price," right? And because the puck had already dropped and he was rushing in, and I said, "Yeah, sure, okay, I'll buy it," right? Like I didn't, it was actually my dad's money I had on me, right? And I'm like, yeah, I'll buy the ticket. But, back then you could get a cheap ticket. And so I went in and I called my dad. I had to use a payphone, of course, because there weren't any any cell phones back then. And I was a little bit scared to call my dad and tell him, A, I'd spent, his money. And
Right.
B, I'm not going to be home till late because I'm at the hockey game, right? And I called him up, and he he said what any good dad would say, which is, I would have been upset if you didn't take the opportunity. But when I got up
Good
there,
job.
and the Oilers had a chance of winning that year, they had a chance of winning at that game, and they won it the following game. But I got up, I sat down, and I turned to the guy beside me and says, "You are not going to believe this." I said, "This guy sold me this ticket for half price." And I said, "I just can't believe it." And I'm like, "I don't know what that guy, what was going on." He's like, "I sold that ticket to you." I was so excited I didn't recognize
the
the
same guy.
It was
Yeah,
the same
yeah.
guy. But you know what, just to be there for a Stanley Cup final, something that very few Calgary Flames fans have ever had the opportunity to see. It was fantastic and something that I think during those times we just kind of took for granted, right? But
Yep.
absolutely unreal. And I don't. The truth is, I was young enough. I don't remember much of the game. I couldn't tell you who scored. I'd have to go back and look. And but at the same time, it was just so exciting and to be there with the chance of, like, back then, right? Everybody rushed onto the ice, right? Like it was
That's right. It's so weird.
it was unbelievable, right? And
Yeah.
how many new traditions were made back in those days, around the Oilers and what they were doing with the Stanley Cup. Like my dad loved the track, going down to the track, and Dave Lumley would be there with the cup almost every day, right, in the summer, and it'd be leaning against the club seats. And it was not a big deal. Now you only see it when the guy comes through town with the white gloves. I can't remember his name, but you know what I mean, right? Yeah. So you used to now what sports do you just primarily cover, like CHL and NHL and that sort of thing, or?
No, I've in working in television, you had to, when you're doing highlights, you're doing all different sports. So, I haven't covered any cricket or I have covered rugby. I remember when New Zealand came and not the All Blacks, but it was pretty cool to see that. But I pretty much covered every sport out there, and then I focused on junior hockey. Pipeline show when Guy Flaming and I did that, and I've always loved junior hockey, but I love baseball. Used to watch a lot of golf. Don't watch as much as I used to. Phil Mickelson was, when he was in his prime, I loved watching it, but I love sports in general. So and I try to play as much as I could growing up.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, that was. Were you aware? I think some guys are, but were you aware of just how lucky you were, like to, be able to do that, cover it, and make a living on it? I mean, you know what? I had Jason Strudwick on the show. I don't know, a couple of years ago. In fact, I went to high school with him, so I called the high school card and said, "Hey, Jason, I don't even know if you remember me, but we sat beside each other in English class." And anyway, so Strudwick came on the show, and I realized at that time, I play a full NHL season a year. Like, I love hockey. Like, I go out and I play. In fact, I play summer hockey. I play more in the summer than I play in the winter. I'm nonstop on the ice, right? And typically, if I'm not podcasting about hockey, I'm out playing it, and if I'm not watching the Oilers game, I'm out playing hockey. And I'm sitting there and I'm talking to Strudwick, and I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, so I go out and play a full NHL season and I pay to play, right? And then I come home and I get onto the airwaves and I do this broadcasting, and I pay to broadcast, right? Like, I'm not, this is a hobby for me, right? And so it's cost me, I don't spend a lot of money on it, but it cost me some money. So, and then I'm looking and I'm talking to him and I'm thinking, shit, like, you got paid to play hockey.
It's the opposite, yeah.
Now you're getting paid to broadcast. I'm like, damn it, like, maybe I shouldn't have listened in English class either. Oh man, yeah, no, that's.
But he's a
that's
doctor,
good.
right?
Yeah. That's
Right.
that's right. Yeah.
Pre-med.
Pre-med,
Pre-med, yeah.
Actually, I will hand it to Struds. He was a pretty smart guy, if I recall correctly, and it comes out on the air. But I mean, that's great. Where did you start? You said you're from Brandon. I remember the Wheat Kings because I spent some time in Saskatoon growing up. I spent most of my time in Edmonton, but I go to the Blades games. My uncle is a Blades alumni, and so I'd go. In fact, I took hockey schools every summer at the old arena in Saskatoon, which has since been torn down. I do have a good story. You remember that old arena in
I
Saskatoon?
don't.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Well, I went there. This was Guy Lafleur had his first retirement, and I went there. He was on a. They had this NHL alumni sort of road show where they were playing like firefighters, just like Mike, what you were talking about earlier, where they were playing EMS, Tiger Williams or whatever. Anyway, so it was Guy Lafleur, Steve Shutt, Ken Dryden, Reggie Leach, Kerr was there. Like we're talking, some of these amazing players.
Mm.
And I was number 10 my whole life. Like I'm still number 10. I was a Guy Lafleur fan. I've got a French background, Hébert. Right, my whole family we're all Habs fans, and my dad was there, and as I said, I went there and I did my hockey school there, and my dad hears on the radio that Guy Lafleur's and the rest of the guys are signing autographs at the old arena. Come on down, right? And we get there. Of course, there's no Twitter or anything to tell everybody that they're there. If you didn't hear it on the radio, you're not going to hear it. So we head over there. We're the only ones that show up. And I was probably about 10 years old. I wasn't very old, and just this little snot-nosed kid, and basically drooling because Guy Lafleur's there, and I got a chance to talk to him, tell him I've been number 10 my whole life, and this and that. I could care less. I didn't even know who Steve Shutt was. And and so, in fact, the funny thing is I got this Guy Lafleur picture, and I had Guy Lafleur sign it, and I had everybody else sign the back of Guy Lafleur's picture. Right? So I've got this Guy Lafleur picture, and on the back are all these, like Reggie Leach, right, who I've since had a chance to meet, and I even put on his Stanley Cup rings, which was pretty cool. But anyway, so we're sitting in there, and nobody's got cell phones, so you can't just snap a picture. And my dad didn't bring. He thought it's going to be packed, right? Like this was an all-star lineup of alumni. It's going to be packed, and he didn't bring a camera. So he and my cousin went off to go get the camera, and they took a little longer than expected. And Steve Shutt, who I know now and I'm mad at, he looks at Guy. He says, "Guy, I don't think anybody's coming. Let's get out of here." And I'm just like this little 10-year-old kid who's not going to say anything. Like I didn't speak up for myself. Like, wait, my dad. I didn't even tell him my dad's coming back, right? And so they take off. About 5 minutes later, my dad walks in. I never got a picture with Guy Lafleur. And so my dad and my cousin spent the next half hour going into every bar downtown Saskatoon looking for the guys, and we never did run into them. But long story, that all started because I remember watching the Brandon Wheat Kings come to watch the Blades all the time, and they were always the meanest team. Like I remember Brandon as being a mean team. And so good on you for being from there. Good Manitoba boy, right?
Yeah, you betcha. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man. So anyway, sorry that was way off topic, but I love that, and I always thought because you always hear about Guy Lafleur smoking 2 packs a day. I don't know if there's any truth to that, but those guys were definitely drinkers, right? And they had it. They were out of there as quick as they could, and I was just sitting there waiting for my dad, ready to cry, I'm sure, right? Because Guy Lafleur just walked out, and that's probably why I never made it to the NHL.
There you go, yeah.
It scarred me for life. So what about you, doing this broadcasting thing? Was there any, of course you got Gene who meets Gretzky, at the unmentionables, and what about you? What's your brush with greatness in your job and your role?
Well, I was lucky to start. I went to broadcasting school in Saskatoon for whatever 6 months that my course was. I was lucky to start in Brandon. My first job was in television, and one of the first big events I got to cover was the 1997 Olympic curling trials, which was held in Brandon. And I'm a big curling fan. I was brought up in Manitoba. It's OV and curling that you're weaned on when you're growing up in Manitoba. So. I was a big Sandra Schmirler fan, and she made the most amazing shot maybe ever in curling in that event. And I'm like, this is my job. Like I'm barely out of school, and I get to watch this stuff. Like sign me up for the rest of my life. I don't care. And plus the fact that I got a press pass and I get to go to every weekend game, and they're going to pay me to do this. It was really quite cool. And I was telling Jason Chimera, who was on my podcast, he got traded there one year, and
Oh, we lost him. Oh,
and whether Marty, hello.
Oh, you're back. You're back.
Okay, there
we
you go.
lost you at Chimera.
Okay, yeah. So it was neat to meet those players and start building those relationships from team to team. Whether it's Marty Murray or Wade Redden or I went to Red Deer for a few years and worked there, and got to know Brent Sutter very well, and guys like Kong and different things. One of my good friends now for a long time. I did a short stint in Regina, and it was fun to be in Regina, but I was going to Regina so I could get to Edmonton. Literally, that was my goal. And then getting here, I remember I'm a really big Andy Moog fan, as you can see. He has his own wall here in my office. So the first time I got to interview Andy Moog, I remember. There was an event. He was here they didn't retire his jersey, but they're going to bring him when they used to bring a different player in. And so the whatever press release came out that they were doing this for Andy Moog, and John and Kevin Carius and John Sexsmith, knowing how big a Moog fan, they're like, I think we're going to go and do this. And I said, I will run you guys both over in my car if you take this assignment. Like, this is my assignment. I'm going to go meet my idol for the first time here because I want to do that. So that was one of the coolest things, was getting a chance to interview Andy Moog about his career. And I'm sure I went fanboy on him and stuff like that. And, there was that. And then and Guy Flaming on the Pipeline show as a wedding present tricked me into thinking we were interviewing Glenn Hall. And then right before we brought him on said, by the way, this is Andy Moog. And I'm like, oh, he goes, here's some stats if you want to. And I'm like, I know everything about this guy's career. I was basically a stalker. So I think Andy Moog probably has a restraining order out against me because I got so excited every time I got to talk to him. So the opportunity to do that, the first time I got to interview Wayne Gretzky when he was the coach of the Coyotes was a really, really cool experience. And, covering Grey Cups and just the events that I've been able to cover. And I'm just, I haven't been to Europe to cover some of the World Juniors that some of these other guys have been to, but I've been very lucky. I've got to cover a lot of winning teams, see some great hockey, meet some people, and I'm no longer in mainstream media, but still trying to be involved and do it kind of my own thing. But definitely in the 23 years I was in mainstream media, it was a pleasure and it was fun. And, when I was in radio, I'm like, I get to go talk for 3 hours. It's probably not enough. 3 hours is probably not enough for me to talk. So I've been very fortunate to be able to meet and cover some very cool things.
Yeah, once you start, and I've obviously not had the experience you've had. I've been at this for 3 years now, but once you start talking hockey, and one of the downsides about doing this is you don't necessarily, nobody's there to kick you off the air, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
You could be on here for, Mike and I have sat on here for a few hours at a time, and then I got to look at the clock and say, oh, you know what, it's about time, and everybody's already tuned out like about 2 hours ago, and it's just you and I talking. We could do that on the phone, right? And and instead we're scheduling this and we're talking about it, and the reality is you don't have to pay me. I mean, I love to do it, right, and just have some fun. And most of the time we get, some people interacting. And in fact, I didn't put the call-in line on tonight. Well, it's on, but I didn't put the number up very often, so we didn't get any calls. But it's nice to have, people call in too the odd time. I'm gonna maybe throw that up there. Just it's getting late anyway, so we might shut it down quick. But it's been good, right? Like you just. Yeah, you're right. Like you can just go on for, a few hours, and then you realize when it's all said and done that you just did 3 hours of broadcasting, and What? How long was your show typically on 12?
3 hours.
It was
Yeah.
3 hours.
Yeah, 9 to midnight, and then depending on if the Oilers played, I did pre or post, but they usually ran into it. So it was 3 hours, and whenever the Oilers played as well. So some of those East road trips were killers because the game they would start at 5, the game would be over at 7:40, and so that's when you start your post game show, and then you're going right to midnight. And depending on that Oiler game, there was, you could either get a really angry fan base for that whole time or indifference. That sometimes people just didn't care anymore, so they just didn't were tuning in.
So did you ever have you had people calling in, right? And I'm sure you had a lot of regular callers. Was there ever anybody like that you kind of, like you'd grown every time they'd call in, and then maybe years later you're at some event or something, and they come up and say, "Hey, I'm," yeah. You ever have that happen where it's like, "Oh no, not you." Like,
Yeah, not as much. We would get. I actually there's some. So I met some really great people from regular. It's calls have sort of died out in talk radio as texting has come in. People would sometimes call in if the day Taylor Hall got traded. We took calls for like an hour and a half, just straight calls. People lost their minds, but on a regular basis, it's more text and social media. But I have been able to meet some really cool people that texted into the show and called time. And we did have that would call in every once in a while. He tried to be regular, and he was a little bit all over the place. And he was entertaining, and he was never over the line or a belligerent or anything. He was a young kid. But the funniest moment was Hernan is like, yeah, it's and I'm trying to remember what his name was now, but it's so and so. I'm like, okay. So we're talking to him, and this was at like probably 11:15. And he's like, hey, just started asking, he kind of like did a bit of he was like Chris Farley in those skits where he's like, remember that time you said I'll be back? And he'd be like, remember that McDavid goal tonight? Because he was a young kid. He was starting a story about this McDavid, and all of a sudden you hear is whatever his name is, hey, who are you on the phone with? And it was his mom in the background. I gotta go. And he just hung up right away. Never heard from him again. I don't know if he was barred from calling the radio again, but that was probably the funniest call that we ever had, interrupted by his mom and his curfew.
So you basically had like some Stern Show characters then.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. No doubt.
That's awesome.
Good whack packers. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mike, did you ever call in?
I think I called a couple times. Yeah.
All right. And
I was barred. I think I got yelled at. Yeah.
I think in my lifetime, I only called into a radio show once, and it was the Bill and Bill show. Bill Matheson and Bill. What was the? Anyway, I was just a kid, and my dad, because of the being in that vendor industry, he had one of those old brick cell phones that used to cost like $1.50 a minute, and
right.
so I used that to call. That was the only time I ever called in. And they spent the next 2 hours on their show talking about this young kid that was on a cell phone, and they couldn't get over that. Of course, now every kid's got a cell phone, but I'm aging myself. But yeah, it was about. I think that call cost my dad about $20, and it made for some good radio for a little while. Bill Matheson, and what was the other guy's name? Bill. Oh man,
I don't know.
Anyway, they were on the air for so long. I actually my brother's ex-father-in-law used to be the station manager over at 96 K Light back in the day. Bill Anderson. I don't know if you knew him.
Okay.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, so I'd spent some time around, a little bit of time around there, but that was about it. I don't know why I never called in. I've often thought about. I texted the other day, like you said, right? Like people are doing all the texting now, and we'll have people interact on Periscope or on YouTube or Facebook or whatever. But yeah, they don't call in. The odd time we get the odd drunk guy that calls in, which is always kind of fun. But
We used to get a guy calling in from Boston Rob or something like that, and he loved the Oilers. And he would call in, and he'd be like, "Is this live? Are you guys like? Is this a real station?" And we're like, "Yeah, man, we're like the ESPN in Canada." He's like, "Oh, okay." But every game, he'd be like, "Is this live? Are you guys actually a station, or is this just like some guys in the basement?" I'm like, dude, man, no, we're an actual station. But he would call like during the playoffs. He goes, I love you guys. I love you guys. He would never talk about Boston. He always wanted to talk about the Oilers.
I think he calls
weird.
Reed Wilkins now.
Oh, probably, yeah, because there was no late night anymore. So we had the odd guy that would call every once in a while. I had one guy named Moog, and I think he was, playing with flattery, but his call was mostly overly optimistic guy, and he would predict an Oilers win every game. That's how optimistic he was, and this was during the terrible times. So that guy would call it, and then he stopped watching the Oilers. He got so frustrated with the Oilers, he stopped. And then when I was podcasting, he got back in touch with me. He's like, "Hey, I'm watching again." And I'm like, "Of course you are, because they're good again." But so we had the odd guy that were regulars, but not too often. As I mentioned, people morphed into more texting and social media and things like that.
yeah, and I think that's kind of the way. It's going to maintain at least for a little while, and then maybe we'll get. I mean, it's interesting, right? I mean, there's just so many different ways to go about it. Anyway, I think I'm need to give it a rest for the evening, and I just want to say, it's great having you. It's good to have. Well, I don't know if I should compliment you, but the microphone and the sound and the audio, that's probably the best audio that I've had from a guest ever.
Oh, good.
And
Good to hear. Good to hear.
of course, it's probably you're probably the one broadcasting professional I had. It's funny because we were talking. I had to walk Strudwick through the process to get him online.
Sure. Yeah.
And it never occurred to me that you got producers and you got, just like you said early.
That's right.
You don't do any of that. You go in and you hit the button and you're ready to go, right? You probably
That's
learned that in
literally what
broadcasting
Struddy
school,
does.
but
He rolls in, flips the button, and starts talking. Like that's literally what he does.
Yeah.
He throws the button on and does the show and makes everybody laugh. It's one of the funnest guys and funniest guys that I had the pleasure of working with over there. But yeah, he just rolls in and throws it on. And I remember talking to Rod Peterson, who's in Saskatchewan, when he left the Riders play-by-play gig and was looking at the Rod Peterson show that he's doing. He said to me, he goes, "I just want to be able to walk in, turn my mic on, and go. I don't want to sell. I don't want to, this or the, I just want to be the broadcaster." And I love that too. Unfortunately, I don't have a radio station anymore, so I have to be the guy that does everything. But that's a good gig when you could just roll in and put the button on and go.
That's what Mike gets to do.
That's right. Yeah,
Hey,
exactly. Yeah.
I'm the talent around here.
That's right. Well, I do. Thanks so much for joining me, and I hope to get you back on. And as I said, we're going to do these Tuesdays and Thursdays for as long as we have to do something to kind of keep our sanity. And we've had a few people reach out and thank us for talking about something other than what's going on out there, or in quarantine or wherever you are, and just have some fun and be here. So really appreciate you coming on. This was fun. It's good to talk to you, and certainly, yeah, if you're available, and hopefully this doesn't go on too long, but if you stay available, I'd love to have you back on. Be great.
Yeah, you just let me know. I'd like to do it again.
Yeah, excellent. And Mike, as always, thank you so much. So this is the end of the Oilers live stream. Everybody have a great night.